All right, everybody, welcome to Associations and Rails. I've got my little README here from yesterday. Just a quick recap of yesterday. We reviewed what an ORM is. We discussed ActiveRecord's purpose and what the philosophy convention of reconfiguration is. We set up our databases and models with ActiveRecord from scratch. We explored the rake file a little bit, its possibilities. People have been asking me about the rake file in our one-on-ones. It's really not something that you're going to have to configure a lot. Generally, moving forward, the rake file is going to be largely configured for you. It's just good to be aware that it's a tool where you can put in code that you want to execute from the command line, code that you're going to be, actions that you're going to be running a lot, right? So the rake file is just a tool for us to be able to execute code that we're going to use all the time. And in the case of ActiveRecord, we're going to be making migrations, migrating, and dealing with our database a lot. So it's really helpful to have a rake file set up there. We talked about migrations and how they are basically kind of a template that ActiveRecord gives us and says, fill this out. And once you pass it to us, we'll kind of be able to handle the rest. We'll link up your models. We'll set up your database the right way. We talked about what a schema is. A schema in this sense is meaning like, what does your database look like? Here is a picture of your tables and your columns. And then what I wanted to touch on today that we didn't get to yesterday is just really quick altering databases and models with further migrations and rollbacks. Any questions about objectives from yesterday? Any lingering we want to go over? And this just reminds me that I have to do one thing really quickly. Okay. Sweet. Okay. Continuing. Today we're going to talk about, we're going to review the has many belongs to relationships as well as has many through, aka many to many. Hopefully we won't spend too much time on this here, but I think it's important to kind of review what's happening on a Ruby level. We set you up really well to understand what's happening on a database level. We're going to talk about creating references to foreign keys in the tables. A couple ways to do that. We're going to set up the relationship in our model, so our movie.rb file in this case. And then we're going to talk about relating models in the console and elsewhere. And then I think if there's one more thing that we might have time for, we can talk about our C file. I'm not sure if we'll get there yet, but it's kind of like a bonus. Okay, so let's get started. Let me make sure I did this right. Okay, so yesterday we used the migration to create the table movies in our database, and we gave it the attributes of titles, which is an error, I realized. Titles is an error, it should just be a singular title, right? Got a rating, a release year, and our genre. And I noticed this in my one-on-one immediately after. So imagine that you're me and you just created this table and you're like, oh no, I made a mistake, right? Yesterday I talked about the confusion over how to correctly change the database once you've made a change to it. And I'm going to kind of propose 3 ways. One way is kind of being the I need help. Nothing else is working, which I think somehow when you're a beginner seems to happen a lot more. But I think if you focus on the first 2 that I'll go over, it'll hopefully you'll avoid having to do the third. Okay, so the first 2 cases, and maybe I'll write this in the notes as well. If I could kind of create a flow chart, I would say, you know, did you just commit the error like literally 2 seconds ago, right? No data has been added to the database since you made this mistake, right? So I know that I made some sample movies yesterday, but I have since then kind of recreated the database. So let's just imagine that I have not, I've not committed any movies to the database. My rows are empty, right? I've just created movies, and I instantly realized that I made a mistake naming title, right? Title should be singular, not plural. if the error that you made was the last error that you committed, and again, like I said, you have not committed any new data to the database, the most simple way to undo your error is to just do what's called a rollback. We run rakedb rollback, and again, whenever our migration files, the change method, right, interprets how to make the change progressively, right? And then it also interprets how to undo the change in the case of a rollback, like we just did, right? Like I mentioned yesterday before change, and this also still exists if you need to ever customize it, but the up function is where you would say, okay, I'm making the migration, I'm committing these changes to the database, and the down would have been the reverse, right? So in this case, up would have been create table, and down would have been drop table, but change infers the infers the change for us, right? It infers the down, it infers the drop table. So I've essentially just completely dropped the table movies from my database, right? But it's okay because we hadn't committed anything yet. So if I go to look at my schema, I see that now the version is 0, right? The schema says, as far as I'm concerned, you haven't run any migrations yet. If we had a bunch of migrations, it would have just reverted to the last migration, right? And it is possible to, if you do several migrations back to back, to roll back, all the way up. Again, you want to be careful if you have information in your database already, because if you drop a table, you're losing that data. So it's important to think to yourself, is it safe to roll back in this moment? We just created the movies table, right? So because of this rollback, again, our schema does not recognize that. Is there a method to roll back all the way? I'm not sure off the top of my head. I would just, if I were rolling back all the way, I would essentially just be deleting my entire database, and that'll be the last thing that I go over. So stick with us till the end. Oh, Jenna, did you know what it is?
No, I have to look it up, but it's like you give a number that you want it to roll back to.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But I'll have to look it up because I don't remember the syntax.
Like to the version or whatever, like, oh.
Yeah, to what like schema version you want to roll back to.
Okay. Cool.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. So Jen popped that in the chat when you figure it out. So essentially, again, this migration is here, it exists, but technically it has been unrun, right? So now I can make changes to it. I'm like, okay, oops, this is actually supposed to be title. And then I can run rakedb migrate, and the change has been made. Now it says title. Remember that your schema is only a reflection of it's a reflection of what your database is supposed to be like, but it's not a direct reflection, right? This is based off of schemas alone. Okay, cool. And then Jen has posted in the chat how to roll back to the specific version of the migration. Thank you, Jen and Mary, and Rukshan for asking the question. Okay. Let's see. Sweet. So the again, so it's just a reflection of. But again, if I were to change title, like if I were just to remove this completely and try to rerun my migration again, nothing would change, because although it's a reflection, it's not. Oh, it actually tries to come back. I think, is that what happened? Huh. Interesting. Yeah, I think it like put it back in there for me. It said you didn't do this right. Yeah. Huh. Okay. Cool. But again, erasing things from the schema doesn't remove them directly. It's just supposed to be kind of for your reference based on what you've written in your migrations. Okay, so let's say you've got a lot of movies in your database already, and you're thinking, man, okay, I need to go in and I need to add, let's see, we're not, you could say something like, we want to put in like box office numbers, right? We forgot to do that a long time ago. we don't want to go back and alter anything in the past. So you have to, in order to do that, you have to create a new migration, right? So this is the second step of doing this. It's either, it's either making a migration, or sorry, making a rollback to do an immediate change, or making a migration to change something further down the line once your application is kind of already up and running. So we can just say, you know, rakedb create migration, and then we can say, we have to name it. There's a name parameter expected, and we can say add box office numbers to movies, right? And we'll get our descriptive migration name with the automatic timestamp with the version number. And we can just say add column, and then we specify which table it is on the movies table. We want to say the name of the column. We can say box office numbers, and we can then say that it's an integer, right? And then I can rakedb migrate, and ActiveRecord reads this file. It notices that it's the most recent migration. It runs the change method and alters the schema accordingly. So now we have a box office number column in my movies database. So again, as Jen had posted in the chat, there are ways to do migrations several steps backwards, right? Sometimes, especially when you're learning this, it can be common to just get yourself in a weird situation where you're not 100% sure what you did. You may have accidentally tried to go in and make a change by altering a migration, or you put the migrations out of order. I remember this happening all the time as a beginner, but now that I've done this more, I'm not 100% sure how it happened. Maybe it was just a weird mistake that I was making. But if you just kind of want to start from scratch, you can always just run rakedb drop. And what rakedb drop does is, as you'll see here, it just gets rid of your database file, right? The schema still exists, but it's not really up to date because the schema is supposed to be mapped to a database, but without a database, the schema is just referencing the last thing that it had to reference. So at this point, I can really kind of go in and look through all of migrations and say, I want to make these, you know, I want to make these changes now. I kind of want to change it a little bit. If I were you, I would maybe try to just start your migrations from scratch. But if it's a simple fix that you realize, oh, okay, it'd just be simpler if I drop my database, meaning that you're losing all of your data, by the way, right? And start over from scratch. Then I can say, you know, rakedb create again, and then rakedb migrate. Rakedb migrate. And yeah, go ahead.
Just to add in, I remember, I think I would have to do this when I would accidentally change my migration files before trying to like roll back, and then I couldn't remember what they were.
Right,
and
exactly.
You can't roll back if they aren't identical to what you rolled forward. So it's like, really, yeah.
Perfect. That's such a great example. So what Jen is trying to say is if she accidentally went into this migration file and tried to make changes, thinking that she had rolled back, right? What ActiveRecord does is it relies on what you have in your change method to undo what it did, right? So if you were like, oh, I didn't want this table to be called movies, I wanted it to be called films, and you accidentally try to roll back at this point, the drop table method is going to try to run films, and then you're going to get an error in your console saying, well, there's not even a table called films, for instance. So I can't run this change method in the reverse. So again, I think it's kind of just common rookie mistakes, common beginner mistakes, where it's like, just we want to start over from scratch. We just we can just drop the database and start over, right? And now our schema is updated. We don't have that. I took out the box office numbers, you know, and the schema has updated. So those are kind of the three. You just committed the error literally 2 seconds ago, made the mistake. This is what you should do. Roll back. You're deep in the database with a bunch of important data. need to make a change. New migration. Everything has gone to hell and you can't figure out the error. Just drop the database. And this is kind of like the last resort. Generally, if you talk to Jen or myself during a one-on-one, we can probably kind of figure out what's going on. I only encourage students to drop the database when it's like you're getting a bunch of errors and nothing that we're doing seems to be working, and you can't retrace your steps like Jen was saying. Again, as you get better at this, I think it'll be less common, but I do think at the beginning we do make mistakes when learning about migrations, and tricky things can happen. So that is just kind of like a way out. Okay. Sorry, that took a little bit longer than I was expecting. All right, so I just really want to quickly review. So I think what we'll kind of do is I'll go through all of this, all of these steps, just doing the has many belong to relationship, right? The first four, and then we'll maybe repeat the steps trying to implement the has many through, okay? So I want to create, oh yeah, thank you, Lucy. Lucy brings up Lucy brought up something really important in the chat, which is just that you can basically find active record migrations in the documentation. And if you look here on the right, it gives you basically all of the ways to, or all of the changes that you would possibly want. So creating a table, creating a join table, changing tables, changing columns, column modifiers, foreign keys, when helpers aren't enough, when we need to create our own custom migrations, etc. Using the change method, running migrations, rolling back, setting up the database, resetting the database, etc. All of this is here. So please, 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 you're making, of course, I only touched on kind of one thing. I created a table and I added a table, or added a column, but you can remove the column, you can change the names of columns, etc. We just don't have time to go over all of that. The labs will walk you through this as well. Okay, so something else. So I think today what we're going to do is we're going to add a we're going to add a we're going to add a director's model. Yeah. So we're going to add a director's model, and let me just open up a whiteboard. So we have a movie, and then we have directors, right? Which of these, let's see, director, I'll put director here because it's the smaller one. Which of these models is going to have the foreign key? Or I guess before I even ask that question, what kind, so I said this is a has many belongs to relationship, right? So I guess I kind of answered the question myself. Which of these models is going to have the foreign key? Which of these models belongs to the other?
Isn't it the movies? Wouldn't the movies have the key to the director?
Exactly. So for now, we'll just kind of maybe say that I'm not going to put columns for all of the movies here, but or for all of the movie attributes here. But we can imagine that we have a director ID and we have the name and then maybe their hometown. I'm not sure. That sounds okay. And then over here, we have the ID for the movie, and then we have the title and the release year. And then we're going to have exactly the director's ID. This is just kind of shorthand, because the ID of in the movie is going to refer to which director created it, right? So we're going to talk about how to set up this relationship in ActiveRecord. So the first thing that I'm going to do is go back to sharing my code, and I'll create another file for the director.rb, and I'll say class movie, and it's inheriting from ActiveRecord base, right? And end it there. Okay. Now, I wish I could hop back and forth between whiteboards. So I already have my movies table. So what's the thing that I'm going to have to change in my movies table in order to establish this connection? My movies table needs something new that it doesn't have already. Any idea what it is? Well, right now my movie doesn't have a reference to the director ID, right? So I need to go in and I need to add that column. I'm going to prepare the movies to receive a column for a director ID. And I guess at this point, you might be asking yourself, Chris, is it better to create the director table first with all of its attributes and then associate the movies, or put the foreign key for the movie? Sorry. Chris, would it be better to create the director table and then add the foreign key referencing the director to the movies table after? And I think the answer is it doesn't quite matter, because you're going to complete both of them before you can even move forward continuing the building out the relationship. So I'm going to let you decide, what the best way would be. Right now we already have the movies column, the movies table, and I think it's going to be quite simple to just go ahead and for the purposes of this, I'm going to create a new migration. Even though I said we could do a rollback, I just want to demonstrate other ways of adding. Well, I guess we did this one already. I will say this: one advantage to
I would say, Chris, the way you're about to do it is the best practice.
Okay, that's what I was going to say too. Okay.
Because if you were working on a live database, you would never want to do either of the other two options, because
exactly.
You would
I think that is the best. Yeah, Jen's point is that when you're working in production, basically the other two options that I gave you wouldn't really never occur, because we do want to keep track of all the changes we're making to our database incrementally. The other two are really just kind of like for you as beginners when you're working or becoming familiar with the ins and outs of ActiveRecord. They are viable options. But I think you're right, Jen. In this case, basically, whenever you're working on an application and you want to add something, you should always add it. You should always prioritize making a migration if possible. Okay, so I'll say add director ID to movies. And notice how the wording here, there is kind of a little bit of a convention that will just take a little bit of time for you to get used to. But whenever we're adding a column, we'll say add, and then we'll say the name of the column, and then we'll say to, and then we'll say to which table it is, right? The method here is add column. The first argument is to which table to add it. Movies, the column is going to be called director ID. And the value is going to be an integer, right? I wanted to touch on something in just a second. Let me run this migration. We look at my schema now. An integer, there's a column integer, a column director ID with the value of integer, right? That we're expecting to be the foreign key. There are a couple new ways to create relationships on the database level. And the priority here, or the reason for this, is called relational integrity, where basically at this point, our database isn't 100% aware that the director ID is a foreign key. We haven't explicitly said that, right? ActiveRecord as an application, as a gem, will be able to infer based on how we're going to set up, how we're going to establish this connection. I think at this point, understanding the ins and outs of the other ways of doing them aren't 100% important, but I think you will see this when you're looking at documentation for ActiveRecord. Let's see if I have it. So when you're making a migration, you might see t.references or t.belongs to. And these are just simply more explicit ways of saying this column here is a foreign key, right? This column here is establishing a relation with another table. So as you get more comfortable with ActiveRecord and you want to practice a few of the shortcuts, which I think will also become easier as we move into Rails, because these migrations aren't going anywhere. You can look a little bit more into what belongs to and references do. They're actually aliases of each other, so they do the same thing. But why, in the long run, it might be useful to adopt migration practices that more explicitly express foreign keys and table relationships than just saying integer. But again, for the purposes of just beginning, we know that the director ID is going to be a number, and ActiveRecord will have no problem going to the director table that we were about to create and finding the ID based on the integer in this column. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and build out the directors table, and then anybody let me know if you have any questions in that time. I'm just gonna say rake-tb create migration, name, create directors. Did I spell that right? Directors, nope, I didn't. In this case, I think it's okay to just go in and fix your typo. The command line just makes the class name and the file name for us. Hasn't run the migration yet, and there's really not a record of that typo anywhere. So in cases like this, it's okay to go in and change your file names. Let's see, I have a question. Does creating the relationship and integration replace the belongs to macro in the model? Nelson, no, it doesn't. You will see in Rails in the next module that we can create the reference. We can create a migration with the reference in the command line, and that will be established for us. But the answer is no. It doesn't replace the belongs to macro in the model, and I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so we're going to create table directors, and let's see, we'll say t.string is name, and we'll say hometown. I think that's kind of all we really need. Yes, thank you, Jen, for that extra note about indices. I have a couple of really great resources that I can Slack out at the end of this lecture too about indices and foreign keys and model reference and table relationships as well. Okie dokie. So now if we look at our schema, we have two tables. We have a directors table and a movies table. Okay, now let me test this out in the console. So I can say Ruby. Didn't I create a console? I thought I created a console yesterday. Oh, I did. It's in the rake file. We just say rake console. Great. So I can make a new movie. I can make a new director. Oh, initially. Oh, I didn't require it in the environment file. Director. I should use require all here in a little bit, but it's okay. I can make a new movie. I can make a director. Ah, director. No. What did I do? Director. It's inheriting from ActiveRecord base. What is going on? Direct, what did I, no, that's fine. Oh, haha, I didn't name it right. I can make a new director now, hopefully. Okay, great. So if I say, okay, Jen's gonna be a director, and the name is Jen, and the hometown is Nashville, and I need to make these strings. Jen, is that true? Are you from Nashville?
I've lived there for like 9 years.
Oh, okay.
We can count it as my hometown.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, and then I'm gonna make a movie, and this movie is gonna be called All About Pry. I should have come up with a really good movie pun. Premier River. And the rating will be a 5, and the release year will be 2012, and the genre will be horror. No, it's a rom-com. And let's see. And I didn't actually. Oh, I did save Jen. Okay, so but I didn't save Jen to the database. So give me just a second. Okay, so I haven't associated Jen with the director yet because I didn't actually save Jen. If I look at Jen, she doesn't have an ID. So I'll say Jen.save. And Jen has an ID now. So I can say that, oh shoot, I forgot to save this movie. Oops. So I'll say Pry is this movie. And I'll say Pry. The director ID of Pry is going to be Jen's.id, right? So if I look at Pry now, the director ID is 1. And I'm going to go ahead and save Pry. Awesome. So I've got Jen, who's a director, and I've got Pry, which is a movie. Pry, these are both committed to the database because they have IDs. And we have in the movie a reference to the director's ID. So in theory, right, we've submitted a lot of our power to ActiveRecord for creating all of the helpful, fancy instance and class methods for us. Based on what we saw yesterday, we should have access to relationships like this. We should be able to say, who is the director of this movie, right? I should be able to say pry.director and receive information about Jen. But what we get here is we get an undefined method for undefined method director for movie, right? It says, did you mean director ID? Yes, the answer is that the Pry instance of a movie does have a director ID. But when you and I were making applications with Ruby before, we should have a reference to the entire instance of a director, right? We should see Jen's whole object come up. And that's because we're missing one step so far. Although the relationship in the model and in the database has kind of been created, or better said, like we've indicated in the movies table that there's a column for a director ID, we have to actually mention in our class files in our Ruby model models that there is a connection here, and it's quite simple to establish the relationship. We just say, you know, exactly how we've been learning how to say it, right? So if the relationship between a director and a movie is that a director has many movies and a movie belongs to a director, we write just that. We say a director has many movies and a movie belongs to a director. And if I were to go back and load these files, and now if I took this movie Pry and I called director on it, it would now return to me Jen's instance. Great. So as a quick review, and this is something that I think is really important to kind of go over. Before we had active record, if we were to write our own instance variable or own instance method for movies, remember that, again, prior to using databases, we would always have to reference the movie class, right? And we would go over all of the movies and we would select the movies where the director matched self, right? Has many is a macro that accepts an argument of the name or the table in which this class has a relationship, right? And it essentially writes this method for us, but now it writes the SQL, right? And actually goes to that table in our database because we're dealing with databases now, right? But it's always important to remember, and this is something that I, as a project reviewer for the Sinatra projects, always have my students remember, is that has many is a macro, right? Remember that macros are methods that make other methods for us. This is a method that accepts as a symbol the name of the table as an argument, and then writes our instance method movies for us and executes the SQL to go over every movie in the movie database, right, in the movie table, look at the director ID and say, is the director ID for this movie the same as the director instance that this method is being called on, right? So just make sure that you remember this isn't, this is very simple, right? But the magic, you know, the method that it writes for us, what it completes, is something that you should all already be familiar with, right? Same thing here, right? If the director belongs to a movie, if the movie belongs to a director, if we were to have written the director, we would have just said the director method. We would have just said director dot, you know, maybe find by ID, and then passed in, you know, self dot director ID or something like this, right? Granted that we had created a find by ID class method in the director class. So yeah, these again are macros that do the work of going into the respective databases and finding the records for us. Are there any questions so far? Let me make sure I'm hitting all of the points here. We create reference to foreign keys in the tables, check. We set up the relationship in our models, movie.rb, director.rb file, and these are lowercase. Okay, and then I guess before we try to do the second exercise, or you know, the has many through, I will talk about a little bit more about relating models here. So you may have noticed that more explicitly up here, I wrote that that the director ID for the movie is Jen's ID. But another thing we can do is we can just say the director of the movie is Jen, right? So there's, although the movie itself has a column that is named director ID, we kind of also have a setter method for director as well, right? And the director setter method will apply the ID for the director that we set it to equal to the column or the value in the director ID. So for another example, let's say that I'm also a director. Director.new, and I'll say the name is Chris. Oops, and my hometown is Phoenix. Okay, so I'll commit Chris to the database, and I'll say, no, the director of Crimea River is actually Chris, right? And if I look at the Crimea River movie, the director ID has been updated. Cry.director ID is now 2. Cry.director is Chris, right? Of course, I haven't updated this in the database yet, so I can say, I need to say cry.save. Cry.save. And now this change has been committed to the database. There are a couple other things we can do. We can also, let's create a new movie. And we'll say the movie is called Get Money. But notice that I have this double pattern here of creating a new instance and saving it, right? We also have a new function called create. And create makes a new instance and automatically saves it for us, as you'll see here in just a second. So this is called Get Money, and the rating is also 5, and the release year is 2019, and the genre is action. And then here, when specifying the director, I can also just say that the director is Jen. Oops, what did I do? I put a capital. Okay. So notice that this movie was automatically assigned an ID, right? Because we used the create method that created the new instance and saved it to the database in one method. We love that. It's got a title, a rating, etc. And then although I passed in director, not director ID, and I gave it an instance to play with, it was smart enough to take the instance of Jen, take her ID, and assign it to the director ID of the movie, right? I'll make one more new movie, and I'm gonna get lazy here and call it Sinatra. Notice here that, oops. Notice here that I can commit things to the database. Let's see. Right now I can commit things to the database that aren't completely filled in, right? This is going to be a problem in the future. We don't, well, I guess it depends, right? You as the developer will decide what are essential things what are columns that can't be left blank in my database. And we'll get into that, not quite this module, more heavily in the next module. They're just called validations. They're basically blockages that say we can't persist this information to the database because all of the columns should be filled in. But for now, I can leave some things blank because I don't have any restrictions telling me to do so. I just wanted to do this as an example so that I could show you that if I'm Jen and I want to look at the movies that I've created, because we've written this has many movies method, I should get 2 movie instances back, right? Oh, no, I didn't. Get Money. Oh, was it? Let's see. Jen, didn't you make 2 movies, Jen? Oh, it's because I changed the director. So Chris.movies. Okay, so Jen and I both have 1 movie. If I wanted to take this new movie that we made, Sinatra, and add it to Jen's movies, for example, notice that Sinatra still doesn't have a director ID yet. I could say Jen.movies and I could shovel in Sinatra. And notice that Sinatra has now been assigned a director ID and Jen's movies now returns 2. So this definitely is a little bit of active record magic happening here, right? I use the shovel operator to shovel an instance of a movie into Jen's array of movies, but not only did it appear in Jen's array of movies, it also assigned Jen's director ID to the director ID column in the row. So there are a lot of fun kind of, again, active record kind of magic methods happening here that it's not necessarily important for you to 100% memorize. But, again, you can look at the documentation and see the interesting ways that you can make relationships to things. I think that the most classic way is to, again, kind of do what we had done before. You can just say, Sinatra.director and then assign it. This is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with doing this. I just kind of wanted to show you like an interesting way to do it. It's helpful. It does 2 things in one, right? Jen, were there any other things that I was missing that you think I should show?
No, I think that covers a lot of it.
Okay, cool. All right, so the last thing that I think we should do, and I guess I'll just ask, are there any other questions before we move on to the second example? Okay, if anyone wants to take a screenshot of this here, I'm gonna give a different example. Now I'm gonna talk about a has many through relationship, right? Has many through relationships, again, also called many to many relationships, are when one model can have many of another model, but the model that it has many of also has many in reverse. The example that I'm going to give here is going to be actors, right? A movie has many actors. And an actor can be in many movies, right? Sorry, my mom is yelling. Actors. And again, whenever these types of relationships exist, we always need what's called a join model, right? We need the model in between that becomes the single source of truth, right? For how this relationship exists. Give me just a second. So maybe for now the actors will just have a name and also a hometown. So an actor can have many movies. An actor can be in many movies rather, and a movie, of course, has many actors in it, right? So notice that the actors themselves, the actors table does not keep track of any foreign key, right, of the movies that it was in, and the movies table also does not have a column to keep track of which actors are in the movie, right? This is where the join model must come to exist. So many to many relationships always need a join. Where the foreign keys live. Did I make it? Okay, so as we had maybe mentioned before, the join model can sometimes be very simple to imagine or come up with. And in this case, I think that that's true. We can say that an actor is in a movie for every like role, for example. Or we can say like a contract or a character, right? I'll say, I think that a role is role or a character would probably be the best one here. So we'll say, wait, oh my God, role. Okay. So each row in the join model is going to have its own unique ID, right? We're also going to have the actor ID and the movie ID, and then we'll have the name of the role. So let's see. We'll say the first one. Let's say that we have. Let's see, actor number 1 is Laura Dern, for example. And I'm not sure where she's from. We'll say Chicago. And my favorite movie of all time is Jurassic Park. So we have Jurassic Park, and I think this came out in '82. And we'll say that Steven Spielberg is also director number 1, but this column is irrelevant in this example, right? We're focusing on 3 other models. So here we would say, okay, so In Jurassic Park, we have Laura Dern. Her ID is number 1, and she's in Jurassic Park, which is ID number 1. And her role, she plays Ellie Sadler. I don't know if this is right? We can also, we can continue down the line, right? We can say Jeff Goldblum was also in Jurassic Park, right? If we said Jeff Goldblum was in Jurassic Park, we would say to Jeff G, I don't know, let's pretend he's from Miami. And he's also in Jurassic Park, so we don't need to make a new instance, right? So in the second row of this roles table, we also have to Jeff Goldblum, who is in ID movie 1. And I forget the name of his character. Why can't I remember his name? I know it's, we'll just say his name is Alan. Okay. So now you see the purpose of the join model, right? An actor can be in many movies. Laura Dern and Jeff Goldblum, of course, are in several other movies. And the movie has many actors, and the join model that we've created is a role, right? Laura Dern played Ellie Sadler in Jurassic Park. Jeff Goldblum played not Alan, but we'll say Alan in Jurassic Park as well, right? So if you haven't really had a lot of opportunity to play with has many relationships, it's okay. The requirement for the first project wasn't really to have this kind of relationship, but this kind of relationship is extremely popular. It's ubiquitous, and you will confront it at some point. So talk to Jen or myself during our one-on-ones if you want to have practice with these types of relationships, and we'll go over drawing them out, coming up with the name of the join model, which can be a really tricky task when the join model doesn't lend itself to something that really exists in the world, right? I've said this many times. And the Sinatra project might be a good opportunity for you to try to experiment with creating an application that does have these relationships. If not in the Sinatra project, definitely in Rails. But again, this is really essential to ActiveRecord, and so I just kind of wanted to give a quick demonstration of how this works. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly build out these models because we only have 5 minutes left. Create migration name, create actors. And I'm also going to create a migration, create roles. Create table actors. And create table roles. Now watch what I do here. I have t.integer. I say actor ID. t.integer movie ID. And then I can also add, I think there's the misconception at the beginning that the foreign key, or sorry, that the join model should only have the 2 foreign keys. But as you've seen, sometimes the join model is the source of really special information that's important for us. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't change it to this. Thanks for letting me know. So all I did really quickly was I just created the actors table. I created, and I'm creating the roles. The 3 columns that I'm creating are actor ID, movie ID, and then the description of the role, right? I'm going to migrate my database. What did I do? Oh, I didn't write end. Or end here. Okay. And I need to make some new files really quick. Actor.rb and role.rb. And let's say class role in here. Turn off the record base. And actor also in here. Turn record base. Okay. So as we've seen with movie and we've seen with director, we had to write this code to establish the relationship between the two. A director has many movies. A movie belongs to a director. based on the relationship that we just created, we also said that a movie has many actors, right? But if you remember how has many relationships work, we can't access the actors directly. There was a join model that we had to go through first, right? So before we can get to our actors, we must say that a movie has many roles, which is the name of we gave to the join model, right? And then we can say the movie has many actors through these roles, right? What we're asking ActiveRecord to do is to go look at, if we're trying to get all of the actors that are in the movie, we're saying first, go check out this roles table and collect all of the movies where the movie ID matches the movie ID that I have specified, right? So if I'm in Jurassic Park and I want to know all of the actors that were in Jurassic Park, the first thing that I have to do is go select all of the rows in the role table that relate to me, right? And once I have all of those, I want to iterate through them and go look at the actor IDs for those actors, and then go reference their information in the actors table, right? Again, if I want to know which actors were in Jurassic Park, I first have to go to the roles table, look at all of the rows where the movie ID matches Jurassic Park's movie ID. Sorry, I don't know why I'm referencing this. I should be referencing this. And once I've selected all of those, I now want to look at the actor ID for each of those roles and then reference the actors table, right? So the way that we write that in our models with ActiveRecord is that a movie has many roles, and then a movie has many actors through those roles, through the roles that are specific to the movie, right? And in the reverse, for the roles, we would say that a role belongs to an actor, or sorry, yeah, belongs to an actor, and also belongs to a movie, right? We're saying that each role has a foreign key referencing both a movie and an actor. And then the actor also has many roles, right? Laura Dern has played many roles. And because she's played many roles, she also has many movies through those roles that she played. So both models, both of the kind of end models that aren't the join model and the many-to-many relationship are always going to have many through the join, right? Has many roles, has many actors through roles. Has many roles, has many movies through roles. And then the join model itself is just going to belong to one of each. We're running out of time. But the thing that I kind of just want to communicate is this seems really tricky at first, but this is really the extent there are some modifications that we can make to become even more specific or to customize this relationship a little bit more. But this is really just the extent of the pattern that you have to follow to make relationships like this work. ActiveRecord, again, is doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And as long as you get to practice how to make those has many through relationships, and you remember to just write these 2 simple lines of code, you can establish relationships like this really quickly. We don't have enough time in this lesson to go through any examples, but tomorrow, before we get into the basics of Sinatra, I can take a second to show you how the 4 models that we have right now can all be working together. Okay, I think that's it. Are there any questions before I let you all go?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Okay, everyone, have a great Wednesday. See you again here tomorrow. Bye.